Tourists and pilgrims frequently come to Israel, and quite reasonably, they want to see the places where Jesus carried out his ministry. In Jerusalem, you can walk through the streets, you can touch the very stones, and really relive the drama of Jesus' death and resurrection. That's exactly what's so special about being in Jerusalem. Inevitably, you find yourself in the Old City, in the Holy Sepulchre, and you say, at last, we've arrived at the place of Jesus' burial. And then you open your guidebook, and wait a second, it says here, there's another place, the Garden Tomb. And this place claims to be the site of Jesus' burial and resurrection. And it's only 400 meters down the road. We're going to examine the evidence and discover which one has the stronger claim to authenticity. Where was salvation won?
The Gospels tell us that Jesus died on Golgotha, which means place of the skull, or skull hill. The fact that we also know from the Gospels that it was outside the city walls, in the 19th century led a certain General Gordon to question the traditional site of the Holy Sepulchre, which of course is inside the city walls, and therefore not a contender, not a viable candidate. But the criticism of Gordon's idea is, in the first place, the major archaeological mistake that he made is that the present-day walls are not the first century walls. The Holy Sepulchre, in fact, was outside the city walls in the first century. To search for the truth, to know the truth, it marks the place in time and space where our redemption was won.
General Gordon came to Jerusalem because he'd heard about this hillside. He'd heard reports that this could be Skull Hill. He stayed in a house just over on the city walls there, and as he looked, that's what he saw, that rock face. And he became convinced that what he was looking at was Golgotha, or Calvary, as mentioned in the Bible, the place where Jesus was crucified.
And moving along to what perhaps is my favorite place of all is Calvary. And we can see Calvary here in front of us. Today, this rock of Calvary is a 12-meter high portion of rock, but we don't know what it looked like 2,000 years ago, how much of it remains. By common agreement, that is, even with non-Christian scholars, this is the rock on which Jesus was crucified.
In the Gospels, we read that right in the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden that belonged to a rich man. And in the garden, a tomb. So we're going to head down through the garden, and I want to show you the wine press. The wine press is Roman era, almost certainly here at the time of Jesus. And what that tells us is that the whole surrounding area would have been vineyards.
Elements of garden have been found underneath this space that we're here. And it's easy for us to imagine that it could have actually happened in this spot where Mary Magdalene saw Jesus and thought he was the gardener and did not understand who he was till he called her by name.
When the Bible talks about gardens, we shouldn't think of ornamental gardens like we have today. They would be working gardens. A rich man's garden would be there to make him a profit. So you'd be looking at olive groves, vineyards. What we have here is a vineyard, and the wine press itself gives evidence to that. For what we know for certain is when the wine press was built, the tomb was already here. The tomb is at least 2,000 years old. Many people believe that what we're looking at is indeed the tomb in which Jesus' body was laid.
We are now approaching the tomb. What we see here then is a building, a construction, built over the place where Jesus was buried. We do know that certainly by the mid-1st century, this place was receiving special attention from Christians. And in those days, Christian memory was very, very clear about places. And that Christian memory preserved the memory of this place throughout the Roman period, when this was a Roman city and when there was a Roman temple built on this particular spot here.
One of the strongest reasons to take seriously the claim of the Holy Sepulchre to be the site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection is the unbroken continuity of the tradition identifying this as the place. We have remarkable evidence from a very, very early period of the arrival of Christian pilgrims. One of the very interesting finds within the Holy Sepulchre is the presence of what we call kochim tombs, which is exactly the way that Jews buried their dead in the first century. So the presence of these tombs, just a few meters away from the site that is identified as the Lord's tomb, helps strengthen the case that this not only was used as a cemetery, but it was used as a cemetery in the first century. When all this information is taken together, all major scholars, and maybe what's even more amazing, every major church and denomination of Christianity recognizes that the Holy Sepulchre has the best claim to the site. That said, there's also a kind of appeal that the Garden Tomb has simply by the fact that it is a garden. When we go to the Holy Sepulchre, we're oppressed by smoke and incense and a kind of hard-scrabble, incomprehensible structure. When you go to the Garden Tomb, it feels very much like what we read about in the Gospels. Obviously, it counts a great deal more whether you believe that Jesus rose from the dead or not than whether you believe he rose from the dead here or 300 meters away. That said, there's a difference between saying it happened and it happened here. It's the kind of a claim that gives the resurrection a historical force and makes it more than simply a myth.
There are aspects of the Holy Sepulchre that are profoundly important that we cannot replicate and wouldn't even try to do. The history, the drama of the building and the rituals and everything that goes on there, we don't try to emulate that. Why would we? They do it brilliantly. And so I would say to anyone coming to Jerusalem, visit the two sites. We're not in competition. We worship the same Lord, but with totally different venues. We're offering a different experience of the same fact.
Our faith is not based on whether a particular location is historically accurate or not. Our faith is based upon the fact that Jesus is alive and risen from the dead. And this comes about as a matter of faith, believing in something we cannot see, but being able to express the fact that Jesus is present.
Whether this is the exact location is very secondary to the fact that this place speaks of that. The Christian faith is a tangible, physical linking with a physical God who physically made himself known in Jesus. And you may tell I'm passionate about that. This is what a Christian Baptist looks like when he's very excited. Okay?
Christians have been coming here all throughout the centuries to venerate these places because they have such an impact on our salvation. Remember, thinking about these holy places, walking in these holy places, we call them holy because Jesus was here, because God intervened here, reminds us that our salvation was worked out in a specific geographical area, this area here. God walked here, God intervened here. Jesus was crucified here and rose from the dead here for our salvation.